Hey, this is Samuel. Thanks for checking out the on-demand webinar. Now, before we get started, do note that we did join forces with the host of this webinar, Microsoft MVP Antonio Maio, to provide you with an exclusive implementation checklist for Copilot. Check that out in the link below, and now onto the webinar. And with this, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this latest edition of Pass the Mic by ShareGate. My name is Sam, Solutions Architect at ShareGate. You may have seen my face in other webinars before, but boy, oh boy, it does not compare to this one. I would love to say that Copilot's the word of the day, but I think saying that it's the word of the month, if not the year, is an understatement, because we have over 6,000 registrations to this webinar. So I think it's easy to say that Copilot is definitely on everyone's mind these days. What does it mean? Why am I seeing Copilot on my computer, in Teams, on the web? It seems like everything has Copilot today. And it's not as simple as just using it. There are considerations to tackle when it comes to using it from an organization's perspective. And there's no better person to tackle this subject than our host today. I'm happy to pass the mic over to our Microsoft MVP, Antonio Maio. Antonio, all yours.
Thanks, Sam. Can I confirm that you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So thanks so much, and thanks everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. Like Sam said, the only thing we're hearing about from Microsoft these days is Copilot. Copilot is everywhere, and I'm especially excited to be here with this amazing audience to talk about Microsoft Copilot from Microsoft 365. That's Copilot that's integrated into the collaboration and productivity solutions that we use every day, like Microsoft Teams, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and so on. We've got a packed agenda today for you, so I'm excited to jump right in. Now, as Sam mentioned, my name is Antonio Maio. I'm a managing director with Protiviti. I'm also a Microsoft Apps and Services MVP. I've been part of the MVP program for 12 years. I'm also one of the co-organizers of Microsoft 365 Ottawa. That's an event that we host here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, where I'm based and where I'm from. I'm also fortunate to be part of a podcast with two other MVPs that you can check out at m365voice.com. And I have a fairly active blog, antonio365.com. Please do reach out and connect. I do love to connect on LinkedIn or Twitter if you do want to keep chatting about these topics afterwards. Happy to hear with you, connect, and just answer any questions that you might have. Now, we're going to start off by introducing Copilot for Microsoft 365. Then we're going to talk about some of the foundational elements that Copilot's built on. We're going to look at some of the common use cases that Copilot can help us with. And we're going to talk about how you can build a business case for Copilot in your organization. I then have a few simple demos to show you and a couple of the Microsoft experiences with Copilot. And then finally, I'm going to talk through my tips for preparing your organization for Copilot. So let's jump right in. Now, Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 is your digital assistant. It's built on generative AI technologies, and it's integrated into the collaboration and productivity tools that we use every day. When we think about AI more generally, there are many different types, and two of the most common types are predictive AI and generative AI. Now, predictive AI is usually the domain of data scientists. Imagine for a minute that you have a large database, let's say with 300 million lines of customer data, and you need to analyze that data to predict future customer behavior. You would typically use a predictive AI solution to consume that data, classify it with a machine learning model, and then use that model to predict future customer behaviors or future customer purchases. Generative AI, however, is an AI technology which uses pre-trained large language models to generate new content for you and provide a conversational response to a prompt. Copilot is a generative AI solution. And to me, the real revolution that Copilot is making happen is that it's making AI technologies available to everybody. You don't need to be a data scientist anymore to take advantage of AI. And you don't need to have massive amounts of data for it to be useful. It can help you in your day-to-day work through its integration with our collaboration productivity tools. It's integrated with Microsoft Teams for meetings, chats, and even Teams Phone. It's integrated with Outlook to help me with my emails. It's integrated with Word, Excel, and PowerPoint to help me generate new documents, to summarize complex information, or analyze my data. And it's even integrated into OneDrive, Loop, Whiteboard, and OneNote to help me with common tasks in those experiences. Now let's step back for a minute and talk about some of the foundational elements that Copilot is built on. First of all, it's built on the Azure OpenAI service. More specifically, it uses pre-trained large language models that are part of Azure OpenAI. Those large language models are trained on massive amounts of data, and they're designed to do things like classify and summarize information, create new content like documents and presentations, research topics, understand data, write new narratives or content for us, and come back with a relevant, detailed, and conversational response. Copilot also uses data through the Microsoft Graph. It uses your data through the Microsoft Graph to provide additional information and context to the large language models so that it can better understand your intent and your use case. This helps it to come back with those relevant responses that address the intent of your prompt. This is what we call grounding your prompt. So for example, a user enters a prompt into Copilot. This is sent to the LLMs, but the LLMs are trained to deal with many different use cases. And without additional information, it may not understand your particular use case or your intent. The additional information pulled from the graph, like your emails, your chats, your meetings, your contacts, sometimes connections between contacts, your documents, they provide additional context so that you're in fact grounding the LLM in your particular use case. Now, if you've heard the term semantic index from Microsoft recently, this is where the semantic index comes in. The semantic index lays the foundation for the next generation of Microsoft search. It's a vectorized index that connects keywords together for content and intent. Those vector indices are clustered together for similarity, and it helps Copilot to quickly search your content and return data that addresses the intent of your prompt, and not only the words that you enter within the prompt. Now, like we've mentioned already, Copilot is integrated with and accessed through the Microsoft 365 apps we use every day. The apps that I just mentioned, so Teams, Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and I'm hoping to show you some of those in a few minutes. Copilot can also, though, optionally use information from the web to, again, provide additional data points to the LLMs so that it has more data to draw on to provide you with relevant and detailed responses to answer the true intent of your prompt. Now, when it comes to having Copilot access information on the web, this can be controlled by both administrators and by end users. It's enabled by default. However, M365 Global admins or search admins can centrally control Copilot's ability to access information on the internet if, for example, it goes against your company policy or presents risk to your organization. If it is enabled by your admins, end users also have the ability to enable or disable Copilot's ability to access content on the web. Now, like all Microsoft 365 services, Copilot is built on Microsoft's comprehensive approach to security, compliance, privacy, and responsible AI. So you know that it's enterprise ready once you understand these fundamental foundational elements. Copilot respects the permissions and the role-based access controls within Microsoft 365. So it only has access to the information to which the user already has permissions. Copilot can leverage sensitivity tables automatically to protect sensitive data within documents that it generates. And Copilot supports compliance and privacy capabilities within Microsoft Purview, like retention policies, e-discovery, and legal holds to help you remain compliant with policies and regulatory frameworks as you use Copilot. Now, another important foundational element of Microsoft Copilot is the Microsoft Responsible AI framework. It addresses some of the same themes that we're seeing emerge from regulatory frameworks around AI globally. Concepts like fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, accountability. It includes considerations for bias, for unintended consequences, and for being transparent about how decisions are made with AI technologies. It includes important concepts like your data is your data. The LLMs will not learn from your data. Your data will not be used to train the OpenAI foundational models. And your data won't be used either to fine-tune those models. And we'll talk about more of that in just a little bit. However, responsible AI is more than just a set of principles. It's also a set of checks that are performed as both pre-processing and post-processing steps on prompts and responses as you interact with Copilot. It helps protect your organization from malicious prompts or from attempts to access confidential information, from the use of blocked words, from guarded phrases, and so on. It ultimately helps to provide the best experience possible for users based on the important principles that you see here. Now, this is an architectural diagram of Copilot for Microsoft 365 from Microsoft. Now, this is a fairly technical diagram. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I do want to quickly walk us through kind of those 6 points, the actual flow of using Copilot, and pull out a few key important points for you to understand. Now, when a user uses Copilot, first of all, they enter a prompt, and they're going to enter this into one of the experiences within Copilot. You're going to see some of those in a minute, but those experiences exist within Teams, within Word, Excel, PowerPoint, within Outlook, within a number of other experiences. So for now, let's say the user enters a prompt into Copilot. That prompt is sent to the Microsoft Graph. Now, it is accessing additional data, again, to provide additional context about your intent for the prompt to the LLMs. So it's going to access through the graph your emails, your files, your calendar items, your contacts, connections between contacts, and the files that you have access to. It can optionally, as we mentioned, access information on the web. It can also optionally access information through plugins to Copilot. And both of those items, accessing information on the web and accessing plugins, are under your control. They're under the organization's control. Now, once it's accessed that information, the modified prompt is in fact sent to the LLMs. The LLMs process that. Oh, and let me back up for a second. I forgot to mention that when we go to the graph, the pre-processing checks happen. This is where Copilot is checking for harmful prompts, for malicious prompts. It's checking for blocked words, guarded phrases, a number of other items to make sure that people are using Copilot responsibly. Again, the modified prompt is sent to the LLMs. The LLMs also check for responsible AI. The LLMs process the prompt against the Azure OpenAI foundational models. The response is generated and sent back to Copilot. Copilot once again sends that to the graph. And now it's performing post-processing checks. It's once again checking for blocked words, guarded phrases. It's checking if there is sensitive data that was used to generate the response, in which case it will determine if it needs to automatically classify that response with a sensitivity label. Now that happens for documents that Copilot produces specifically. Once it goes through that process, the response is then sent back to the user. Now, some important points to pull out from this is that all of this takes place within your Microsoft 365 service boundary. This is the same service boundary that your SharePoint instance operates in, that your Teams instance operates in. All of your data remains all of your data at rest remains resident within your Microsoft 365 tenant. But the actual interactions of Copilot, because it is a shared service, happen within the Microsoft 365 service boundary. Again, the same way that SharePoint and Teams does. So it is protected. The only 2 instances where data can leave your M365 service boundary is if you've enabled Copilot to access information on the internet, or if you enable Copilot to access information through plugins. These are the only 2 instances where your prompt or your data might leave your M365 service boundary as part of using Copilot. As well, the large language models are based on the Azure OpenAI Service large language models. However, Microsoft 365 Copilot has its own instance of those large language models. It is not using the publicly available OpenAI or Azure OpenAI large language models. Microsoft 365 Copilot has its own instance of those that it maintains, that it uses for this interaction. So again, your data is not shared outside of your Microsoft 365 service boundary. Now, as you can see from this slide, there's many different Copilots out there to choose from, and this is just a small sampling. Whether you're an information worker, or let's say a security analyst, a Power Platform maker, a seller, or a software developer, there's certainly a Copilot to help you with your day-to-day work. Today, we're of course focused on Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365, which is that kind of highlighted box near the top of this slide, but certainly encourage you to check out the other Copilots, the ones shown here, and many, many others that we're seeing become available every day. So certainly encourage you to learn about those others as well. But it's important to understand that Copilot for Microsoft 365 is a particular Copilot. There are a number of others out there also that you'll probably hear about. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about some of the common use cases that we have that Copilot can help us with. Talking about these is important because as you get started with Copilot, you'll find the use cases and the prompt language that works for you, which helps you get the responses that you need. And these use cases here are a good place to start. Let's quickly walk through some of these. I'm going to start at the top left here. First of all, we've got creating new content based on a template. So for example, a contract. If I have a template for contracts, I can use that to have Copilot automatically create a contract for me based on that template. Moving down from that, I can use Copilot to summarize a document or summarize a series of documents or an email thread or meeting notes. This is a common use cases we see used often, especially as you're performing research with Copilot. The next one, again, continuing down, is to create a recap of meetings or to list action items that have come out of a meeting recording. This is probably the most popular use case that we're seeing, where if you're using Microsoft Teams for your meetings, which of course we all are, about 10 minutes before the end of the meeting, a message will actually pop up asking you if you want to summarize the meeting through Copilot. And even afterwards, you can use Copilot to process a meeting recording and get a recap, a really good recap actually from my experience, and a list of action items that came out of the meeting. Continuing on, we can use Copilot to change the tone of a document or an email, which is an interesting one when you want to make something you're writing more formal or less formal, perhaps more positive or less negative, depending on how you look at it. Here in the middle, we've got analyzing data in Excel to identify trends. That's a really good, common, useful one, and I'm hoping to show you just a touch of that in my demo that's coming up. You can use it to prioritize important emails. So for example, if I go on vacation for 2 weeks and I come back, I have a slew of email I have to catch up on. I can ask Copilot, what are the top 10 emails that I need to reply to first from the last 2 weeks? And it will actually summarize that and come back to me with a list of those, which is fantastic. It's a great time saver and helps me to get to the most important things first. I can use Copilot to create a marketing campaign report based on some quarterly financial results. This is, again, a common one that's used. The next one, create new code or create comments based on code. This is probably not something you'll do in Copilot for Microsoft 365. This is probably best for something like GitHub Copilot, which is meant for software developers and software development teams, but still a useful use case to consider. And then finally, help you to create readable and engaging posts in a conversation. So sometimes at work, we can be engaged in very intense chat conversations about important topics. And sometimes we want our chats to be readable, to be engaging, to really capture an audience's attention. And Copilot can certainly help us write those. Now, these are common use cases that apply to almost everyone that's an information worker of some type. What we also like to do is we like to think sometimes more industry specific about use cases. And this can sometimes help us to come up with more interesting use cases that are more specific to an organization. So for example, we work heavily with financial services industry and or FSIs. And we found that information workers, managers, or executives within FSIs can really benefit from some use cases that are specific to them. So for example, Copilot can help wealth managers or financial advisors better prepare for customer meetings by summarizing customer information and creating engaging presentations or pitch books for those customers. That's one example. Another example is that investment analysts often are required to do extensive research on capital markets, and they often need to consume large amounts of data or large amounts of content from different sources to help advise on investment decisions. Now, Copilot can help to quickly analyze company filings, reports, transcripts, earning calls, and so on, and it can summarize this data from multiple sources and help them to get a better understanding of this data much more quickly. So what I encourage you to do is consider the roles in your organization that can best benefit from Copilot and the use cases that are specific to those roles that can help them to, again, best benefit, to get the most out of Copilot, and to help you really build a business case that's specific to your organization. Now, if we get just a little bit more specific on the process that we use for defining a business case, we typically start with some of the roles that I mentioned. And here's some examples, right? We often focus on roles that analyze or work with information or data every day. So often executive leaders, financial managers, technical analysts, sellers, customer service people, compliance teams, and so on. There's many roles that kind of fit that category. Then we look at the activities that they perform day in day. So we often focus on repetitive or labor-intensive activities, those activities that can be simplified through things like summarization and data analysis. And that includes some of the kind of use cases we've already talked about. So preparing for customer meetings, building presentation materials, perhaps researching or analyzing long, detailed reports or volumes of content, finding the information to perform the day-to-day work, or even dealing with blank page syndrome, where you kind of sit there at a blank page and you don't know where to start, where you need to produce a piece. Copilot is great for just getting you started, and often that's enough to help you become productive. Now, from there, then we think of the savings that these roles might get by having a generative AI digital assistant. Now, those savings are often in the form of time, additional time, and you kind of need to think about what are you going to do with that additional time savings that you're going to get. You can use it to do more of the same thing, which is valid, or you can use it to do other things as well. And it's important to identify that as you go through roles and activities. For example, sellers could use that additional time to create more touch points with potential customers or connect with new customers in addition to all the customers that they're currently managing. And we kind of go through this process through the roles, activity, and savings. And as we're defining the savings, we'll think about often the salaries or average salaries of those roles and map that to the time savings they're going to get and use that to build a potential ROI of using Copilot. And as we go through using Copilot, we often measure ourselves against that potential ROI. As we're doing that, though, it's also important to identify, I think, the business benefits of each of those savings that we might get. And those can be in the form of improved efficiency, increased revenue, perhaps risk mitigation, or gaining a competitive advantage over customers. It can mean greater accuracy or even better productivity if you think about that blank page syndrome and getting started faster on things. This is typically the process that we go through when defining a business case for Copilot. All right, so let's get out of slides for a minute and actually jump to our demo. Okay, so I am going to access Copilot through Microsoft Teams. So this is my corporate instance of Microsoft Teams. And you can see here down the left rail, we actually have a Copilot icon. So this used to be called M365 Chat. Microsoft recently relabeled it as Copilot. In Microsoft's documentation, you might see that listed as graph-grounded chat, which is a fairly technical, complex term. I'm not sure why Microsoft is calling it that, but all those things relate to Copilot within Microsoft Teams right here. So clicking that brings us to this window here. And there's some helpful information on how you can get started and some example use cases that you can use it for. Where we enter our prompt is right here in this window. Now, a few things to note. When you do have a long thread of chats that you've entered in, you can clear that out by clicking New Chat up here. Also, if I want to see my previous Copilot chats, I can see them here. So there is actually a history of chats that are maintained within Copilot. So I can get back to them and actually run that again or add to it, for example. And then remember I mentioned that the ability for Copilot to access information on the internet can be controlled by administrators or by users. So in my organization, it's enabled by our administrators, but I can actually control it here. So if I go to plugins, there's this little checkbox here for web content. If I turn that on, Copilot is now going to access information on the internet, as well as my documents and my contacts and my information within Microsoft 365. I'm going to leave that on and we're going to see what's going to happen. All right, so let's go through a couple of examples of using this. Let's say I'm in an FSI organization. I need to hire a financial analyst. So I'm going to ask Copilot, write a job description for a financial analyst. Now it's going to go off. It's looking for information within my tenant. It's looking at my emails, my documents, might look at the internet as well. And it's going to pull back, hopefully, a good job description. It's just going to take a minute. Actually operates pretty fast when you consider how much data it's actually accessing. And here's my job description that it's pulling out. All right, so if we read this, it's actually pretty good. A financial analyst is responsible for studying a company's financial data to give advice for guiding business investments and overall financial strategy. Their duties include blah, blah, blah. So, and then it actually turned it into a job posting for me. So here we've got, title financial analyst, what the responsibilities will be, and what the requirements are. And there's some references here as well. If it pulled information from documents, it can actually pull that here. And if I click on this, it'll actually take me to that document in my tenant. What you'll also sometimes see here is throughout, if it's pulled information from multiple documents, you'll see citations. So within here, I can actually see, okay, this particular paragraph came from this document, who authored it, when it was authored, or when it was last updated, and so on. So this helps me to see where it came from or what its data sources were. So let's say I want to add something to this. I'm going to say add to the job posting that it requires 10 years or more of experience at a major financial institution. Now it has the context of my previous chats, so it can actually go back and add that. Okay. So it added a updated job description, processing it. We're going to give it just a second here and we'll see where, if and where it added my 10 years or more of experience. There we go. And it bolded it for me just so I can see where it added it in. So a fairly simple example, but it actually produced some pretty good content that I could actually just use. I could copy this and actually send this off to someone to post on our job site, for example. So it got me started on doing that pretty fast. Now, let's say I want to have a little bit of fun with this. I'm going to say, rewrite the job posting to be more posting in a more informal tone. And let's see what it comes up with. Because usually a financial analyst position, typically a fairly formal professional position. Let's see what it comes up with a more informal tone. All right, so it's got, hey there, we're looking for a financial analyst to join our team. What you'll be doing, and it lists those things out. What we're looking for, and we'll list those things out as well. All right, so very similar in terms of responsibility and requirements, but a slightly more informal tone. So I played with this particular example a couple of times. Depending on what you put in, you can get pretty fun job description in this particular case, but this is just one example. All right, and I've got that chat here. Right, so now if I want to record this, I'm going to go new chat here, and it'll add a new entry for me here. So let's say I need to create a presentation. Now I'm going to pick a technical topic. In the world of generative AI, there's a topic called retrieval augmented generation. Now, it sounds very technical. That is one of the ways that's technically used to ground our prompts. Let's say I want to create a presentation on retrieval augmented generation in a technical tone. Now, let's say I'm not a technical person, but I've been asked to go and research this topic and actually come back with content for a presentation. I can come to Copilot, I can enter that in. Now remember, I'm in Microsoft 365 chat. It's going to look up the topic. It's going to look through content that I have access to. Okay. And it's come back with a description of the topic. And it says, in your company, there's several documents and presentations that mention RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. For example, there's a roadmap presentation that discusses it. Another presentation introduces RAG and so on. And I've got, 6 references that it found through my organization, on the topic. So I can actually go to those and find it. But notice it didn't create a presentation for me. I asked it to create a presentation, but it didn't. That's because Copilot in Microsoft Teams cannot create presentations. To do that, I actually need to go to Microsoft PowerPoint. So let's actually do that. I'm going to go to PowerPoint, and I'm going to start off with a template. So this is one of our corporate templates. I want it to build this presentation in our corporate template, right? And again, it's that same topic. So in this template, I'm going to actually tell it, instead of saying create a presentation, I'm going to say, oh, let me click over here. So you'll notice up here, I'm going to close this just so I can show you it coming up. Up in the top right corner in the ribbon bar, there is a Copilot icon. So if I click on that, it brings up the Copilot window built into PowerPoint. And this is where you start to learn the interactions. The fact that I can't create a presentation in the Teams chat version of Copilot, but I can here, right? And it's got some of my previous chats here, but I'm going to say, instead of create a presentation, I'm going to say add 5 slides to this presentation on retrieval augmented generation in a technical tone. We'll give it a second to do its work. It's going to go find information from probably those 6 same sources it found in Teams chat. It's going to build a few slides for me. Now, I have started off with my presentation template because I, in playing with it, have found that it's effective for me to start with a presentation and tell it to add slides to it. Copilot can work with the Microsoft built-in templates. You can also create your own organizational deck template, slide deck template, and upload it to a particular folder within Microsoft 365 so that PowerPoint can use those, like the built-in templates. Those it works very well with. So here it's added 5 slides for me like I asked it to. So introduction to retrieval augmented generation, retrieval mechanisms in RAG, generative models in RAG, applications of RAG, and limitations and future direction. So the design is perhaps a little bit lacking, and I could go use Designer that's built into PowerPoint to actually spruce that up a little bit. But it did use my template, it did use my fonts and kind of maintain some of the layout and so on. And it did pull out some relevant topics for me to at least get started from. So this is one example of using Copilot within PowerPoint to get you started on a simple slide deck. Okay, for my last demo, I'm going to switch to Excel. Now within Excel, I've got a very simple set of data, and this is actually a sample set of data that Excel can produce for you. So it's a small amount of data that you can try yourself as well. Again, you'll notice in the top right of the ribbon bar, we do have an icon for Copilot. So if I bring that up, now the first thing that it shows me is convert this data range to a table. It's important to note that for Excel to work with data in Copilot, your data must be within a table in Excel. Now, this is just a data range, right? So this data here, it can't work with. I have to actually convert it to a table. And there is a method for doing that in the ribbon. I never remember how to do that in the ribbon, but it's nice that it gives me just a really simple button here to say, convert it to a table. Okay, now it's done that. And now it's a table, and now I can work with it. Now you'll notice here I can click in the box here and it lets me type my prompt. If I actually, no, I'm clicked inside the table, but if I click outside the table, again, now I can't use it. I have to actually click into the table in order to use Copilot in Excel, and then it'll work with data within that table. So I need to make sure that I'm clicked into the table. Now I can get at this, and it gives me some examples of things that I could do, but I'm gonna ask it to do a couple of simple things. So we've converted this to a table. I'm going to ask it to create a pivot table based on campaign type. There. Campaign. There we go. Type, months, budget, and revenue. Now, this is a spreadsheet of data related to marketing and sales campaigns. And you can see there's a number of columns there for campaign owner, name, the launch date, the type, budget, revenue, targeted users, and engaged users, right? So a simple set of data. I'm going to ask it to create a pivot table on some of those items. So I'm going to tell it to go. We're going to give it a moment to generate that pivot table. Some people are amazing in Excel and they can create pivot tables in their sleep. Other people, this is really helpful for them to quickly create a pivot table. I am not one of those Excel geniuses that can create pivot tables on a dime. All right, so it's just finishing up. You'll see it gives me an example of what that pivot table is going to look like. I'll just let it complete its work here. It gives me a summary of the pivot table. So I created a pivot table that shows the total budget, total revenue by campaign type, year, month, and launch date. For example, in January, the total budget for brand marketing was $1,050, and so on. Now, if I come back up here to the sample, I can click Add to a new sheet. So it'll actually add that pivot table to a new sheet here. Right, and now clicking on the pivot table, I can say, oh, I actually want to see targeted users and engaged users as well. So let's take a look at that, and it's added those in as well. So it's made it really easy for me to add a pivot table on my existing data. So again, a pretty simple example. I'm going to come back to my table here. I'm going to ask it to do another thing. So I'm going to ask it to add a pie chart of campaign type and engaged users. Let's see how many engaged users we got by campaign type in order to find which type of campaign was most successful. Okay, so it's going to go off and do that. Working on it. It actually works to understand your data, is not simply looking at the words in the spreadsheet, and I'll show you what that means in just a minute. Okay, so it gives me a quick sample of what that pie chart looks like here. It's just finishing up its analysis. It gives me a quick summary of the pie chart. I created a pie chart that shows the total engaged users by campaign type. For example, total engaged users for customer experiences, 7,506. If I come back here to my sample, I can click Add to a new sheet. And now I get a sheet with that pie chart. Again, pretty simple example. If I click on that pie chart, I can again change how it looks and see that, okay, my customer experience campaigns accounted for 60% of my engaged users, whereas brand marketing only accounted, for 11%. So quickly able to get insights on some data. Again, really simple example. A couple of last things I'm going to demo for you. I'm going to ask it a question about my data. So I'm going to ask, how much did I spend on Feb email? Because we noticed that, in February, emails were part of the marketing campaign. Now notice there is no spend column in my spreadsheet, right? I have a budget column, and Feb email actually has additional data here after this: Feb email North, Feb email South, Feb email West, right? So if I look at just those three, the actual spend, the budget on those was $1,500. And sure enough, it comes back and say you spend a total of $1,500 on campaigns containing Feb email, right? So a fairly simple example, but it's not simply looking at the words in my prompt. I can ask it, how much did I spend on billboards? And again, it's going to look for all my instances of billboard. In this case, I've got a couple here. I've got another here, some small and some large. And if I look at those, here, I'm just going to add those up down here at the bottom. The total spend on those was $5,550. And sure enough, it creates a little table for me. I could add that to my sheet by clicking this button once it's finished up, but it does give me a summary telling me that as well. And then finally, I'm going to ask it, how much did I make on Feb email? I don't have a make column in here. I have a revenue column in here. So again, it's going to interpret that as how much revenue did you make? And it's going to analyze that for me. So I don't have to be exact on the words that I choose related to the data. These are really simple examples. You can certainly get much more complex here, but sure enough, if I add up the revenue for those 3 Feb email campaigns, it works out to the amount that it found. So a few simple examples in Copilot and Teams, in PowerPoint and Excel. And you do need to get creative with this, right? You need to think through your use cases and how can I use this to summarize large amounts of data, for example, or how can I use this to gain better insights on my data in Excel, or create better presentations, or create more engaging communications. All right, I'm going to switch back to our slides here. Okay, and let's continue on. Now let's get into how do you prepare for Microsoft 365 Copilot? And we have 7 major steps to go through. The first couple are a little bit simple, but the next step I think more interesting. First of all, you need to validate that you have Copilot requirements in place. First of all, each user needs a Microsoft Entra ID account or an Azure AD account. Next, you need to deploy Microsoft 365 apps to user endpoints, to user desktops. Now, there are a few nuances there. One of the capabilities within the Microsoft 365 apps is connected experiences which analyze content. One simple example of those features is when PowerPoint suggests designs for you. There's many others, and you can control whether that's on or off through group policy. So if that is disabled, and some organizations have disabled it, many have not, Copilot's not going to be available for you in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote. That does need to be enabled for you to use Copilot within those experiences. If you are going to use Copilot with Microsoft 365 online apps, so Word Online, Excel Online, PowerPoint Online, Outlook Online, you do need to enable third-party cookies. Now your Microsoft 365 update channel, so the update channel for updating those Microsoft 365 apps, it does need to be set to current channel or monthly enterprise channel. And might be challenging for some organizations. There's still a lot of organizations that have that set to semi-annual channel, which means the Microsoft 365 apps are updated every 6 months or semi-annually. So you do need to change that, and that might be something that organizations do have to evaluate how and when they're going to actually make that change. Finally, you need to have a Copilot license for each user. Now, Copilot is an add-on license. It's an add-on license to Microsoft 365 or O365 E3 or E5, to Microsoft 365 or O365 A3 or A5 for faculty if you're in an educational institution. It's an add-on to M365 Business Standard or M365 Business Premium. So you do need to have one of those licenses first, and then Copilot is an add-on license to that. Also, Copilot is not available for device-based licensing for Office 365 apps, so it does need to be user-based licensing. Next, we evaluate the specific prerequisites for various app experiences. So for example, if you're going to use Copilot in OneDrive for Business, users must have a OneDrive for Business account, of course. Some of these seem obvious, but they're worth calling out just to double check that you have these in place. For Microsoft Outlook, you do need to enable the new Outlook experience in the Outlook client app. Now that new Outlook experience, users can turn that on themselves in Outlook. There's typically a button up in the top right, but it's still in preview, so that's also something worth considering. With Microsoft Teams, you do need to enable transcriptions or meeting recordings for some of those experiences, like being able to summarize a meeting recording. Whether the meeting recording or the transcription, it's not going to be able to do that. And that's true for both Microsoft Teams and Teams Phone. For Microsoft Loop, you need to enable Loop within the M365 Admin Center. And for Whiteboard, you need to enable Whiteboard within the M365 Admin Center. Again, those last two being a little bit obvious, perhaps. Moving on to our third item, you do need to align your network with Microsoft 365 network connectivity principles. And Microsoft has provided some great documentation available here. And there will be a piece that's sent out after this presentation that includes links to some of this stuff. But this is a good idea to do anyway. There's a lot of content in there for understanding connectivity principles and network architectures that you can securely manage Microsoft 365 traffic. And ultimately, you want that network traffic that's destined for Microsoft 365 to connect to the Microsoft 365 front-end servers that are as close as possible to the user's location. So again, that documentation provides great guidance on doing that. And many of these prerequisites or many of these steps are good principles to do anyway to get the best out of Microsoft 365. Number 4, you need to get your content into Microsoft 365. Now, Copilot works with your content both in Microsoft 365 and external content. So one option is you migrate your content into Microsoft 365 with third-party tools or with Microsoft tools, but a great example of a third-party tool is ShareGate, of course. And then you can also, as we talked about earlier, you can extend Copilot to external content. And you do this using the Microsoft Graph connectors, which is an excellent way of extending Microsoft 365 to external content generally. But Copilot can also work with that content. Sam, if you're there, can I ask you to perhaps touch on ShareGate just a little bit?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Antonio. Like Antonio said, ShareGate absolutely supports the migration of content in a few ways. So whether you're importing content from a file share or other sources like Google Drive, Box, we can bring that content into SharePoint. If you're already in the cloud, if you're in a different tenant and you need to consolidate this data into a destination tenant, ShareGate can do that as well. And we can also move content around. So if ever there's a need to bring data that's in a given library to put it into a library where Copilot will be able to reach that data, then ShareGate can do that. And of course, we will preserve permissions, the data, of course, metadata, and allow you to adapt your migration to be modern in Microsoft 365 if you're coming from on-prem. So if you're looking for a solution to bring that data, ShareGate can absolutely help you.
Great. Thank you. Now, next, step 5, and this is an item that's near and dear to my heart. This is a world that I live in often. You need to assess, clean up, and govern your SharePoint permissions. Now, assessing and remediating how permissions and access controls are managed in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams is a really important step because Copilot will have access to all the same information that you do. So you need to make sure that your permissions are in a good state. And Microsoft provides a number of tools to help you do this. So first of all, we've got within SharePoint Premium, there's a set of capabilities called SharePoint Advanced Management, and one of those is the Data Access Governance Reports. There's two kinds of reports there. One will show you sharing that's happening throughout your tenant. So it'll show you where various types of sharing links exist in your tenant. And the second report will show you where you have sensitive data, where you have data that's labeled with a sensitivity label. So that's a great feature to consider. The second, again, this is within SharePoint Premium, is Microsoft Graph Data Connect for SharePoint. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful. Sometimes we call it MGDC. When you take MGDC and you combine it with Azure Synapse and Power BI, that gives you big data tools for analyzing permissions and other information within SharePoint Online. So if you have a large enterprise class tenant, so think of a tenant where you've got 20,000 sites, 50,000 sites, 50,000 users or 100,000 users, tens of millions of files, and you need to assess the permissions across all of those spaces and all of those files. That's a big data problem, and that requires big data tools. And that's where MGDC, or Microsoft Graph Data Connect for SharePoint, combined with Azure Synapse and Power BI, gives you a pipeline that is not throttled. So you're actually able to get that data out, that permission data out very quickly. And from there, you can then build Power BI dashboards on top of it, which show you where you need to most urgently or most importantly, remediate the permissions within your environment. A third option is you can use third-party tools. And again, one great example of that is ShareGate. So Sam, I'm going to ask you again to talk a little bit about ShareGate for a second.
Thanks, Antonio. Always happy to talk about ShareGate. When it comes to permissions management, of course, ShareGate can help you. We can provide visibility on your tenant, on specific sites, and specific libraries, and then give you the options to copy, add, remove permissions. So permissions management is definitely a breeze with ShareGate. But I think one of the things we have to think about as well is the governance of the whole tenant. As people start using Copilot, create documents, and get very excited about these new tools, you're going to be facing a lot of sprawl. There's going to be data everywhere. There's going to be data maybe in workspaces that you weren't aware of, or you might have data that is unused or irrelevant that still exists in your environment that is being picked up by Copilot that you would want to have visibility on. So ShareGate can help you report on these different workspaces, find that data, and action that data so that you get a better Copilot experience. But from the point where you're actually adopting Microsoft 365 and letting your users create the workspaces that they need, provisioning those workspaces in the best way is always ideal. So ShareGate has a lot of provisioning capabilities to help you create those workspaces in the right way with the right checks and balances in place for a more productive environment as well. I do want to talk a little bit about what we're working on from a purely Copilot standpoint as well. Like every other third-party solution, we're actively looking at developing value in ShareGate that is directly tied to Copilot. So everything that I'm about to say here is subject to change, but we are working on site provisioning, so not just team sites or teams. And we're also looking at internal sharing management. There's a few questions in the Q&A that we'll be able to tackle at the end with Antonio about internal sharing. But yes, internal sharing is important to get a hold of for Copilot, and we're looking at doing that better as well. We're also looking at doing OneDrive sharing reviews and not just SharePoint sites. And honestly, whatever our user base needs. So we want to hear from you. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but share your thoughts, share your questions, tell us the kind of tools you're looking for. We're actively building that tool now.
Awesome. And then the fourth tool I wanted to quickly touch on was Microsoft Entra ID access reviews. You mentioned that a little bit, Sam, but built into Microsoft Entra ID, you do have access reviews that can be done for SharePoint sites, for owners, for example, to assess, to remediate, or to attest on a regular basis the permissions that are currently assigned to their sites. So this can be done on a quarterly basis, on a semi-annual basis, an annual basis. Some sort of regular review helps everyone stay on top of permissions. Now, these capabilities help you to clean up your current state, but it's important that you also think of your future state. So how are you going to continue to sustain and maintain the environment from a good permissions and access control perspective? So it's also important to establish a framework for how permissions and access controls are going to be governed going forward. And along with that, develop training to help users understand the best practices that are associated with storing, sharing, or collaborating in Microsoft 365. All of these steps go a long way towards cleaning up the permissions and access within your SharePoint environment and maintaining that going forward. We move to our sixth step for preparing for Copilot. We recommend that you classify, protect, retain, and discover sensitive information with Microsoft Purview. So Copilot has great support for several of the Purview capabilities. In particular, Microsoft Information Protection. You can use that to classify and protect your data. So for example, when Copilot creates new documents from existing documents, when the source documents are labeled with a sensitivity label, the resulting document will inherit that label as well. So if it pulls information from a document that is labeled as confidential, the document that it creates will also be labeled confidential. If it pulls information from, let's say, 3 documents, all with different sensitivity labels, the resulting document will be labeled with the highest order label or the most sensitive label from the source document. So that's a great support for automatically classifying the resulting document that Copilot creates, but it requires that you're already using sensitivity labels to classify and protect your existing information. Copilot supports Microsoft Purview data lifecycle and records management as well for retaining and disposing of data according to its lifecycle or regulatory requirements. So Copilot supports retention policies in Microsoft Purview. So you can actually assign retention policies to your Copilot prompts and responses that are stored with Copilot. And then finally, e-discovery premium. So you can actually use that to discover and enforce legal holds on Copilot prompts and responses, perhaps as part of legal cases. You can also use these to monitor potentially how people are using Copilot if they are trying to access information that they should not have access to. Having a program around that to check for, are people entering malicious prompts? Are people trying to use it to access information or discover what they have access to, perhaps as a malicious insider? That is also a great usage of e-discovery premium. And it does need to be premium. You have to use e-discovery premium in order to discover Copilot prompts and responses. And then finally, our seventh step for preparing for Copilot, and probably our most important step, is as part of rolling out Copilot, to develop a Copilot adoption program and a center of excellence. Now, this often requires a place where users can go and find out more information about Copilot, usually a SharePoint site or a center of excellence site of some kind. Microsoft has provided some great content to get you started from. There is a Microsoft Copilot Center of Excellence adoption guide that you can get at the link down here at the bottom. So adoption.microsoft.com/Copilot. It provides information on roles and resources for using Copilot that you can simply take and use out of the box or customize to your own purposes. The Center of Excellence really should address questions like, how do I interact with Copilot? What are the different experiences where I can put a prompt into Copilot, and what can I do with those, or what can I not do with those? It should also include information about what makes a good prompt, right? We hear this concept of prompt engineering where, creating a good prompt, I have found, really requires practice. It requires, trying different things and understanding what does Copilot really pay attention to. And I guess at its simplest, Copilot requires really a clear goal for answering your prompt. So over here, there's a little bit of content that should be included in a center of excellence. So in your prompts, you can include a goal, you can include context, you can use expectations, and you can point it to data sources as well. So having that kind of guidance along with examples for effective prompts really helps users to quickly adopt it. You can help people understand, how do I provide it context? What kind of information can I include in the prompt to give it context? And then, can I include sensitive data in prompts? Many organizations have told their employees not to include sensitive data or not to include their customer data in prompts. And it's very valid to do, but you do need to let people within your organization know that. And a center of excellence is a great place for you to actually provide that information, along with regular communications and having a champions program. So, coworkers and fellow colleagues that perhaps have started with Copilot early to actually help be resources for those other employees that are just getting started with it. And it's also important to communicate to your users that they should validate all responses within Copilot. It's important to know that generative AI tools are not built for accuracy. They are built to provide a conversational response, and a response based on the data that they have access to. So it is a good idea to have a healthy degree of skepticism, I'll say, on the responses that are provided, and make sure that you validate responses before you action them or before you make decisions based on them. And teaching people that is an important part of a center of excellence or an adoption guide that you provide to people. So highly encourage you to put some meaningful effort into this type of program and make it as part of, build it into your actual rollout of Copilot. And then finally, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We've had a fantastic audience. I hope this was helpful for people, and I think we've got time to take a few questions. And Sam, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Antonio. We do, and we might go a little bit over time if Antonio permits. So we will tackle some of these questions. Of course, we had 6,000 registrations. We just might not get to every single question today, but we will do our best to take the hottest, the questions with the most traffic around them, and creating a recap blog post here so we can get those answers to you. You'll also notice a QR code on the screen. We'll be sending out a survey, not only to know what you thought of the webinar, although I think I'm seeing some questions here that validate the sentiment, but we also want to hear from you from a ShareGate standpoint. As I said earlier, we want to build a tool that our user base wants, and while we're already working on something, very open-minded to building what you guys share with us. So without any further ado, there are some questions, and I'll start with an easy one that isn't a question, Antonio. We do have quite a lot of votes on an attendee saying this is an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. So all the praise goes your way.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Do you have a question here when it comes to what Copilot can pick up on? Question is, does Copilot scan documents that are shared via organizational links? Many of our users are using the wrong type of sharing links, so this is a concern.
So Copilot will scan the information, it'll index the information that you have access to. So if I'm using Copilot, for example, like you saw me use in Teams chat, for example, that Copilot instance in Teams, it is accessing information that I have access to in the Microsoft Graph. So if I have access to the actual source document and it sits within my tenant, it will index that content, it will use that content. If it's perhaps an external document, that's something that's been shared with me through someone externally through a sharing link, it won't be able to access that because that's in a separate tenant. But it does need to access the information that's indexed in your own tenant. So if the question is about internal sharing, so if something has been shared with me, yes, it should be able to access that because I have access to that document.
Thanks for that, Antonio. Next question here is, can the LLM be trained on organization-specific documents/templates to make it more familiar, such that responses are most relevant to the given organization?
That's a great question. So the answer is no. For Microsoft Copilot, for Microsoft 365 specifically, organizations themselves cannot train the LLMs. And this is an important point, right? Microsoft will say, and it's absolutely true, The LLMs are not trained based on customer data. They're not fine-tuned based on customer data. In fact, when a call is made into the LLM, that is a stateless API. The LLM runs in a stateless manner. So it has no ability to store data. It has no ability to take the customer data and retrain itself. If you, in fact, do have a real use case where you want to build your own, let's say, generative AI like chat on your own data and train models based on that, Microsoft does have other tools for doing that, right? So you can go to the Azure Machine Learning Workbench and build your own AI models there. You can build your own Copilot-like experience on Azure OpenAI service. That certainly is a much bigger task because you're effectively building your own Copilot doing that. Now, your data that is that you have access to within Microsoft 365, as we described, that is accessed as part of sending a prompt into Copilot. So it's less about training the models and simply having your data in Microsoft 365, and then that will be used by the LLMs and by the whole Copilot experience to provide you something that's relevant and using your own data. So I think it's worth trying the Copilot experience as it is now with your data in Microsoft 365, and then figuring out, do you really need to go to the trouble of training your own LLMs? Because that's a big cost. That is not a simple thing. That is a big step to go.
Fantastic answer. And I think this bridges to another question here that I think I can answer, which is if Microsoft does not use our data to improve their LLM models, then how would we expect Copilot to improve over time through usage by our users and the data / processes specific to our company? Now, Antonio, I think answered that very well when it comes to the lift that is required to make it much more specific to your organization. But I think something we're all used to hearing now is that the Copilot or the AI that you're seeing today is the worst that it'll be, and it's going to get better and better and better over time. But I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious, Antonio, from your perspective, how can it get better and better for an organization? What should users or IT pros expect out of Microsoft in terms of quality growth over time?
So Copilot is changing extremely rapidly. Microsoft continues to work on it. New capabilities are being added all the time. So for example, 2 weeks ago, if you went into Copilot and tried it, it really did not have good understanding of timestamps, right? So a couple of weeks ago, and I tried this myself, if I asked it, what's my next meeting? It'll come back with what my next meeting is. But if I asked it, what's my meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning? It couldn't. The answer was literally, I can't answer that. Now, if I go in and do that, now it'll actually tell me my meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. If I ask it, what are my meetings tomorrow? What are my meetings between 10 and noon? It'll actually answer that. So that ability to support timestamps, that's now there, at least to some degree. A couple of months ago, it was really bad at math, right? You could ask it the same math question and get 2 different answers each time. Now it actually has gotten better at that. So you can see just on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis, Microsoft continues to improve the technology. I think in terms of it getting more relevant related to your data, this is where having your data in Microsoft 365, understanding the semantic index that gets generated automatically, that really helps it to get to the data points as quick as possible within your environment. So the more data you have in M365, the more you're using that data, the more relevant your responses will be. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thanks for that. We're coming up on time here, so I have a softball and maybe a longer one. So let's start with the easy one. Is it possible to deactivate Copilot in individual apps? So for instance, in PowerPoint, but not the other Microsoft 365 apps?
That's a great question. And I don't have an answer to that one, actually. I'm sorry. I will actually go and find that and come back with an answer. So well, I'll take a note and I'll write a quick blog on that because I would like to know myself if you can do that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And of course, we'll be including that in the post-webinar blog. And of course, labeling that one question as the softball is going to be the one that catches Anthony off guard. All right, well, then here's another one, and I think we'll end on that one. How much data cleanup do we need to do? Do we need to archive unused SharePoint sites? Copilot will read our email too. Will it read spam emails? All I think is garbage in, garbage out. Any advice to clean up our data before enabling Copilot?
That's a great question. I do think, and this is a general recommendation, it's not necessarily specific to Copilot, but I think Copilot makes it all the more urgent. I think maintaining a clean, well-structured Microsoft 365 environment helps your organization generally, right? Disposing of content that you no longer need, archiving content that you need to retain perhaps for compliance purposes or retention schedule purposes, but people aren't actively using. Archiving that off, disposing of content that you can, those are important steps to keeping a clean environment generally. That not only helps Copilot get to the right information faster, it also helps to reduce your attack surface, right? We think about records management and using it to manage records according to compliance and so on. That's great, and that is very valuable. But also the actual disposition of content, the deletion of content is really important for removing content you no longer need and reducing the risk of litigation or the risk of cyber attacks accessing information that you didn't need to keep around anyway. So I think those are all good steps to take. The amount of effort varies, of course, depending on the amount of content you have, how big your M365 environment is, how many users you have. I would say it's a good step to go through. I would not let it slow you down in trying Copilot, though. I would almost do some of those things in parallel. So, for example, we've had a pilot of Copilot going on for quite a while. Cleanup of our environment is always ongoing. We actually have gotten our corporate tenant to a good state from a permissions perspective, but that took a meaningful amount of effort, right? Depending on how big your environment is, that can take months or years. And I wouldn't use that to slow down your adoption of Copilot because there's just so much benefit you can get from some of the use cases that we talked about.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Antonio. And I think looking at the attendees, I'm mind blown by how many attendees are still sticking around, even if we're 6 minutes over. That tells me two things: that Copilot is very important for people, but that this webinar was fantastic. So again, thank you so much, Antonio, for all your help. I would be doing a disservice to our team here at ShareGate if I didn't thank them as well for helping answer all these questions in the chat. There were so many questions, and again, we've answered a couple of them, but we'll get back to you in a blog post. If you want to know more about Copilot and catch up on everything related to the growth of AI, you can catch Antonio here on LinkedIn as well as X. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to see the upcoming webinars here at ShareGate, including our upcoming Past the Mics. And again, we'd love to hear from you. Check your email. ShareGate will be in there, but if you want to scan this QR code and get ahead of the game, we're there as well. And Antonio, I will leave the last word to you.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Sam, and thank you to the ShareGate team for having me. Thank you for everyone that joined us today. This is a fantastic audience. I hope this was helpful for folks. I will get to that blog to answer that question because I am really curious about that. And just want to thank everyone and wish you all a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.